Hello, Jake.
Hey everyone, good afternoon. Cool, so today we're going to talk a little bit about water. Um, so unfortunately, I know we've given a lot of advice about all sorts of different brew methods and everything, and it's already a lot of information to take in, and then now there's a whole nother thing which is probably even more complicated. It's almost, I would say, one of the most important aspects of making good coffee, and that is the water that we're using. So if you think about it like this, I guess when we're making filter coffee, water makes up about 98 to 99% of the drink. So it is, I guess, an extremely important part. Unfortunately as well, coffee requires very kind of specific water. It can't be too hard and it can't be too soft. So I'm kind of going to first go into a little bit about what I mean by hard and soft. So basically when you think about water, there's two parts. Firstly, this is a very simplified view. There's two parts. There's the mineral content of the water, and for this we're mostly talking about magnesium and calcium. And both of these are two very important minerals for extracting coffee. They aid in the extraction and they also kind of affect the flavor. And then we have the alkalinity, or the buffering capacity of the water. This is basically the water's ability to maintain a pH of 7. So I guess coffee is naturally acidic. So if your buffering capacity is too high, you won't get a lot of acidity in the coffee. You won't be able to, I guess, taste a lot of the acidity. And if it's too low, the acidity can be overpowering. So that's not ideal either. So it's a very kind of like a fine balance, I guess, between kind of too much and too little. Same with the mineral content. So I guess when you're making coffee at home, there's a few different options you can use to kind of create easily pretty good water to use. The most obvious and probably the easiest, but perhaps not the most environmentally friendly, is using bottled water. So if you want to go down that route, I guess I would highly recommend Volvic. So this is giving us a pretty ideal, pretty close to ideal mineral content. Maybe the calcium is a little bit higher from memory than the magnesium, which is more kind of like a taste thing and kind of depends on the coffee you're using as well, but it gives a very good result for our coffee. The second is using something like this, the BVT, or I said that in German, the BWT Bestmax XL. So this is more like kind of a commercial filter, but if you have space in your kitchen, you could kind of like install something like this under your sink, whatever. BWT also make like a smaller kind of carafe version of their filtration systems. So basically this is essentially like a carbon filter. It's softening the water a little bit, but what it's mostly doing is taking out any undesirable aromas or kind of flavors in the water, like chloride or anything that might be in the water, which is obviously going to improve the taste of the coffee, but it's not going to be ideal. The other thing you can do is make your own water. Now this is something that it's very easy to go down a rabbit hole with and can be extremely complex, or you can do it in a way that's perhaps not so complicated. So the way you can do it, I guess, easily is by completely demineralized water, and which you can get at most supermarkets, and simply mix it with tap water. So for example, in Berlin, our water is about 350 ppm, so that means parts per million, and we're talking about kind of the mineral content in the water. So that for us is too high for coffee. We're aiming for around kind of like 130 ppm. So we need to bring that down. So what we can do is simply mix tap water with distilled water. So for example, in Berlin, depending on where you are, it's around 300 to 350 ppm. So what you could simply do is mix 2 parts distilled water with 1 part tap water, and you're going to get water that's kind of roughly in the right range. The problem here is you can't control the ratio of magnesium, and calcium. So you're kind of just going to get what you get from the tap. If you want to find out exactly what's in your water, depending on where you live, a lot of local governments will actually publish like the full breakup of the water online, and this is often free. So you kind of just might have to pop in your postcode, I guess, onto like a government website, or just Google it, and you might be able to, depending on where you live, find that information quite easily. And then from there you can work out kind of roughly what ratio of distilled water to tap water that you need to use. So the other thing you can do, which we would do if you have like if you work in a cafe or something and you're using an RO system, for example, is test the water yourself, and then you kind of get a slightly more accurate idea of what's going on. So the two easiest and cheapest kind of ways to do that would be firstly using something like this, which is a conductivity tester. These aren't extremely accurate, like full disclosure, but it is going to give you a rough idea of basically the mineral content or the ppm of your water. So you just turn it on and you dunk it into a glass of water, and it's going to give you a reading on the screen, and that's going to be in parts per million. And the second way is using something like this. And this is drip testing or titration testing. So this one is GH. So this is measuring our general hardness, which is our, I guess, mineral content in the water. Like I said, this is like, I'm kind of like simplifying things a little bit. There's some great material if you're super interested in getting a little bit deeper into fully understanding the water chemistry. It's a great book, Water for Coffee. I'd highly recommend that. Or also on the SCA website, there is some free information that's like pretty good and maybe a little bit more digestible. It still goes into the science a little bit, but it's also maybe a little bit, it's a little bit more broad and a little bit more simplified. So yeah, so I think as well, so we have obviously our big filtration option, bottled water option, or making our own water option. So, I mean, that's all good in theory, but I thought it would maybe be good if I can taste some different waters, and I'm going to try and describe to you how this is kind of affecting the flavor. So first of all, I have a cup which I've brewed just as a cupping bowl with completely distilled water. So if we go back to what I was talking about before, this has no mineral content. So this is going to mean our extraction is probably lower, because like I said before, we do need some of these minerals, specifically calcium and magnesium, to help with our extraction. It's also going to have a very low KH or alkalinity. So this is going to mean that I should taste very strongly the acids in the coffee, and it might be a little bit overwhelming. Secondly, I've used Volvic Water, which is, as far as bottled water goes, I think very good, and it's very close to kind of the water that we use in our cafes, actually. So this should be a very good balance. It should be very close to what we're aiming for water-wise. And then thirdly, we have just tap water, which here I tested before was about 353 ppm, so much too hard. Too many minerals in there. The KH I didn't test, but generally when I test the KH from our tap water, very, very high. So around kind of 200, over 200 ppm. For our alkalinity, we're aiming for around 70 ppm, so much lower. So from this, I'm probably not going to get any acidity. I might get it a little bit, and it's going to be very muddy, I'm guessing, the flavor. So I'm just going to have a little taste, and I'm going to do my best to kind of describe to you what I'm tasting.
Jake, before we go into tasting, I think many people at home use something like the Brita Filters, and I also have someone asking about it. So what's your opinion on these?
Cool. So I actually have one of these at home as well, which I use when I forget to take water from work, basically. So they are good. I would recommend BWT also make a version of this, and they have one called like Magnesium Plus or something, and it puts a little bit of extra, it's remineralizing the water a little bit with a bit of magnesium as well. So first of all, when I talk about these, I should say they're not really lowering the hardness of the water. They do it a little bit, but mostly what they're doing is removing any undesirable odors and flavors from the water. They're basically just cleaning it up a little bit, which will make the coffee taste better, but it's not really getting it to an ideal point if your starting water is very hard. So it's an okay solution. It's better than nothing, I would say, but it's not ideal. And the other thing with these is they have a very short lifespan. These filters, you have to change them once a week or minimum once every 2 weeks, which is also not great for the planet and expensive. So if you're going to go the filter way, although something like this is definitely more expensive, if you have it going to a separate tap in your kitchen, this is going to last years. So I think ultimately when you add up buying constantly new filters every week or two, this will probably work out cheaper, and I think probably be a much more environmentally friendly option as well. Does that kind of answer it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Yeah, so it's not a bad option. There's also Peak Water, which I think has just come out, which will actually give you really good water, but I'm not so sure on the details, and I think it works on a similar system, so you'll probably have to constantly change some part of it, which will probably end up being expensive, I would say. Cool. Are there any other questions on the chemistry side of that?
No, not
I
yet.
think I went over that quite quickly, but if anyone has any questions about anything I've said, send them through and I'll do my best to answer them. Like I said again, I'm trying to keep it kind of simplified as possible, because it is a very complex subject and it's very easy to kind of go overboard. I might talk a little bit more about making your own water at the end as well, but first I'm going to taste these coffees while they're kind of at the right temperature. So I'm using this beautiful coffee from Los Camulos. So we got this from La Palma y el Tucán, very famous farm in Colombia. It's not actually from them, it's from their Neighbors and Crops project, from a producer called Ana Lucia Martinez. It's a Castillo, grown at around 1,600 meters above sea level. It's also a lactic anaerobic process coffee, which is super interesting. So kind of all anaerobic processes kind of new in the broader sense of the word to the coffee industry. It's basically fermentation where we're trying to remove oxygen from the equation. So putting things in sealed tanks and allowing them to ferment within themselves. And this is done with the mucilage, and because of the higher concentration of lactic acid, it kind of gives a bit more of a higher concentration of lactic acid, I guess, in the final cup, which gives it a crazy acidity. It's super interesting. I think it's the first time we use decadent as a flavor descriptor on the bag, and I think it's definitely that. It's crazy. Lots of tropical fruits, but I think I'll describe the flavor a little bit more when I'm tasting them. So first of all, I'm going to do my distilled water. So this coffee has a lot of natural sweetness, partly due to the extremely high quality of the coffee and also due to the processing. Not a lot of it is present in this cup. It's extremely acidic, and the other main thing I notice is the mouthfeel. It's very astringent. So this is going to be partly because it's going to be a lower extraction to the other cups for sure, and also you need the minerals to give the coffee body as well. And that's to do with the calcium and the magnesium and how they interact with each other and how they help with the extraction of the coffee. So it's not super pleasant. It's very, very astringent and acidity. I'm finding it quite hard to identify the actual more specific flavors. I'm getting more of actually like a lemony kind of citrus acidity, which is not really what I'm expecting to find in the middle cup especially. So we'll go on to the next one, which is with Volvic Water. So this is around 130 ppm. Wow, so completely different. And I guess from a technical point of view, I'm maybe more of an expert in this. I taste a lot of coffee, and I guess I do that for a job. But this is seriously, anyone will be able to taste the difference between these cups. It's really not like a minute difference. It's really a very, very big difference. So in the middle cup, I'm getting lots of papaya, pineapple, very, very creamy. It's almost like a cake, like some sort of tropical pavlova type sweetness that I'm getting there. Maybe a touch of cinnamon as well. Super complex. This is really very rich. I can still taste it now. It's like very, very long finish as well, which is definitely something that I'm particularly looking for in a high quality coffee. So really, really excellent, and just miles apart from the first cup. So I'm going to try the last one now, which is just tap water. So I think it was around 350 ppm. So more than double kind of the recommended, or my recommended kind of mineral content for the coffee. Okay, so that's different again. There's definitely sweetness in this cup. So there's very little sweetness in the first cup. Is sweetness in the last cup. But again, the flavor is very muddled. I'm finding it very difficult to identify any of the flavors. It's not unpleasant. It's just kind of like a sweet coffee. It's lost all of its complexity, basically. It's pleasant, but it's just sweet. There's a good, the mouth feels okay. It's maybe a little bit beefy. It's maybe a little bit too heavy in the mouth. Like, I don't know how else to describe that. Beefy, I would say. But it's really lost all of its complexity. And this is really case in point. I don't know if anyone's had the kind of frustrating feeling of when you buy coffee from your favorite roastery and you look on the bag and you see all of these like fantastic flavors, tropical fruits, complex floral flavors, and then when you go to make it at home and you just don't get any of that. And you think maybe it's because you're not trained in tasting or your palate isn't as refined. But honestly, I think a lot of the time it's going to come down to your water, even more so than your brewing technique. Because I guess how I've made it here is I've literally just, to make a cupping bowl, I'm just pouring hot water on some ground coffee. Essentially, it's really not complex at all. And the difference is it's completely radical. It's really quite extreme. Has there been any questions on what I'm saying so far?
No.
Cool. Alright, so I'm going to talk just quickly about how you can kind of go, if you wanted to go a little bit deeper into making your own water, there are ways you can do it with distilled water and actually adding minerals to it yourself and making kind of a bigger batch of water. Now this is really cool. This is something that we do as well for our QC to kind of be a little bit more consistent. So you can use pretty simple things that are pretty readily available for your alkalinity. You can just use baking soda. And for magnesium and stuff, you can use Epsom salts. You can go buy all the stuff on Amazon. Super easy. You'll need some very accurate scales is the main thing. And you'll probably need, bare minimum, you'll need a conductivity tester. You can pick one of these up for, I don't know, 15 euros, 20 euros, maybe even less. And I would recommend getting some titration testing kits as well. So like I said, this is the GH one, but you can also get ones that test a little bit more specifically. Like you can test the pH of your water, which is handy when you're doing the alkalinity part. And you can also get ones for magnesium as well, when you can test the magnesium content. And this is where you can go a little bit deeper into your ratios of calcium to magnesium, because this actually has a massive effect on the flavor. Like personally, I would go a slightly higher magnesium content to calcium, but that's maybe just a personal preference. If you wanted to do that, there are actually some calculators online that will kind of like help steer you in the kind of right direction if you were interested in making your own water. I think Barista Hustle does one, for example. There's lots and lots of recipes online that you can find, just all over the internet as well. It's something I think that people get super deep into, and it is super fun and super interesting, and it is going to kind of allow you to get a slightly more customized thing, kind of customized flavor profile, I guess, so to say. So something that you can do, but it definitely involves a bit more effort. Cool.
I have a question for you. I find that kind of interesting. I just read the question to you. Have you heard of citric acid or some lemon juice drops in the water to reduce alkalinity?
So to make it more acidic, why would you? I'm not sure. Is this if your KH is too high? I'm guessing. I have not experimented with that myself, but you would have to be very careful doing that because that's going to have a flavor. Like citric acid has a very strong flavor. So in doing that, you're going to definitely affect the flavor profile of your cup, even if you're doing it in a very kind of minute way. If you wanted to know more about that, these kind of acids like acetic acid, citric acid, lactic acid, you can buy these as like powders and stuff and dilute them into water. And a very interesting thing, don't make it too strong, obviously, is to do that and taste the acids by themselves. This is a good exercise for learning about tasting coffee as well and kind of identifying flavors in coffee. So I think if you wanted to go a little bit deeper into that, that's something I'd recommend doing for sure. But I don't know about putting it in the water and then brewing the coffee with. It's not something I've tried, but I'm a little bit skeptical of it. I think you'd be better off bringing it down by mixing in some distilled water, I think. Cool. All right, I think that's it. Thanks for joining. And if you guys have any more questions, feel free to fire them through, and I think I can probably answer some of them after the fact. I'll probably post a little bit of the kind of water chemistry information as well on like the feed to the video, if that's how we're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you miss anything or want to kind of go back and kind of learn a bit more from what I said. All right, cool. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you guys next time. Ciao.